Earlier this year, I set out on a no buy year, and so far it's been successful. And as part of that, I wanted to make sure I was using up any supplies that I had that were partially used, including things like this, a partially used sketchbook. I have loads of them, and I've done quite a few sketchbook flip throughs so far on this channel, purely because I've had them and I wanted to record finishing them. It's really useful for me to go back through and have a look once I've completed a full sketchbook and see what direction it took my work and what I might want to do in the future. So here we have a Strathmore mixed media 500 series hardbound sketchbook. It's got 100% cotton paper and it is beautiful for anything wet media related. It does work really well for mixed media, but sometimes pencil can be a little bit iffy, in particular colour pencils, because of the tooth of the paper. So let's have a go. Let's have a little look at what I did in this sketchbook. The very first page is a full video here on YouTube where I got the new special edition Neocolour 2s and I wanted to use them all in one portrait and see what they look like as a palette. This Mama and Baba Rhino were the result. I was really brave to go straight in, apparently, a few of you said, and use a brand new page with a full painting rather than swatching. But I don't mind. I like starting at the beginning, and if I am in the mood for a swatch page, I'll do a swatch page. But if I want to do a full painting in a brand new sketchbook I've not tried before, then I'm more than happy to try that as well. After that, we went on holiday last October to St Ives in Cornwall, and it was the most beautiful, beautiful holiday. My husband had never been, and I hadn't been since I was a very small little girl, so it was a pretty new experience for us. And when we got there, I was so overcome with the beauty of the sea and the colour of the water in particular that I just spent an afternoon after strolling around the harbour and getting to know the area, swatching out all the colours that I could remember from that day. So these are the supplies that I took with me on that holiday, and these are all the individual colours that I found which I felt reflected St Ives. And this I actually did when we were sat in a cafe overlooking the harbour, and we were up one floor. There was a large open window right next to me, so I could sit and get the pencil sketch down and most of the watercolour layers to begin with before we packed up and moved on, and then I finished any details at home, or back in the Airbnb I should say. Here's some more panels from our experiences on that holiday. This is a picture from the walk up to St Michael's Mount, a tidal island in Cornwall, with a beautiful old house with lots of religious significance and history. Totally magical place, and I was taken with the woods in particular up to the mount, so I've captured a small image of it here. You can't go anywhere in St Ives without a seagull trying to steal your food. Where a friend recommended a brilliant donkey sanctuary called Flicker Donkeys. It was quite a drive from St Ives, but 100% worth it. There was a vegan festival on, so all the food was vegan, and they had lots of little pop-up markets, market stalls from all sorts of different local vendors, and that was wonderful for me because it's so rare that I can go and have my pick of anything being vegan. Plus, we got to spend time with hundreds of beautiful donkeys in massive pastures, and it was just a wonderful, wholesome experience. This iron gate, I guess, with the fish design, is inspired by the fishing village nature of St Ives, and that caught my attention, so I wanted to add that in from one of our walks. Again, I've added in some more memories. This cream tea was incredible. It was my very first store-bought, well, it was homemade, but one I didn't make, I should say. It was my very first vegan scone with jam and vegan clotted cream, and it was just heaven because that is exceptionally rare to find. More seagulls and little motifs. This is the Tate St Ives Gallery. Kernow is the old name for Cornwall. We also visited a seal sanctuary, and this is baby meringue, one of the recently rescued seals. They do rescue and then release the animals in this sanctuary. And this shield was something I saw on a stone wall in St. Michael's Mount, and I was taken with decoration. Where we go, Thomas our hippo goes with us. So he, of course, came to St. Ives. He really enjoyed this chair overlooking the bay in our Airbnb, or this one in the kitchen, which was just around the corner from where he's sitting there. And he looked so cute. I had to get my gouache out and paint him sat there in his blue stripy pajamas that I did make for him. Here we have a watercolour of the RNLI lifeboat station at St. Ives, a picture looking down upon the bay from a little hill not far from St. Ives Tate. We visited a wild bird sanctuary as well, and we saw these mini falconets and this beautiful bluebird. I have hundreds of photographs to work from, still from that trip. Of course, more seals, and another view of the harbour. At the bird sanctuary, they actually had a enclosure with otters in, and it was wonderful because we had a talk from one of the keepers who told us all about their habitat, their diets, explained their behaviours and personalities, and we were up close and personal with them. And the thing that I hadn't realised is how loud otters are, and they make this incredibly loud, squeaky noise that I'd never really noticed in previous occasions when I'd seen otters in zoos or what have you. But they were absolutely joyful, so I had a great time recording lots of video and then coming down and sketching these and then coming back to the Airbnb and painting these otters. More panels from St. Michael's Mount. I'm just trying to quickly capture some of the areas that I particularly noticed. These are some of the small beaches dotted around St. Ives, all incredibly beautiful. I think this is my favourite landscape. Coastal scenes with crystal clear water, sandy beaches, and old ancient rocky cliffs is just heavenly to me. This was an experiment that I didn't know whether I loved or hated, and now looking at it, I still can't really decide. I think I verge on hate. I wanted to experiment just putting down a block of orange and then using my near colours on top to try and pull out the image. Again, another view from the harbour. It's not horrendous, but certainly not my best work. Here I drew some panels one day and I had an intention for something in particular, but I don't remember what it actually was. I left it blank for several weeks actually before I came back, and at the time we just completed a week of re-landscaping our garden and I wanted to capture some of the memories from that. So in these little panels I've done some pictures of things that you can see from my studio window or in our garden just as a little memory. This was a Katie Moody live Zoom class. We drew pictures of each other, and it was funny because Katie drew a picture of me, and I look very much like Olive Oil, the cartoon character in it. But there we have Katie. And I think we were painting from life. So these are all things on my desk. We did with a very quick couple of minutes warm up. And then I painted my chalky bear and Tip Top his own teddy bear in gouache. And then we made a little panel to finish, 3 panels, kind of like a cartoon or reportage where we were describing a little story. So that was a fun exercise. Moving into April, this was my very first time setting out to complete the Plain April challenge, and I have a video of that on my channel. I did abandon it halfway through because I was really struggling not having any sort of easel to take out with me. This is an 8x10 sketchbook, so it's pretty big, almost A4 in size, which means that this is almost A3 in size. And to be honest, I just found it unwieldy, especially as it was extremely cold and windy in April, and I just wasn't enjoying the sessions. But you've seen some of these, so I won't spend too long on them now. I really did enjoy this though, and actually, after this week in particular, I had it cemented in my brain that I was going to make myself a sketch easel. And you'll be glad to know that I have actually made the sketch easel, and there'll be a video coming soon where I show you what I've made and how I'm finding it using it out in the wild. This is a view from my studio window of the farmers' fields behind us. This is the sand dunes at our local beach, a beautiful tree at Martin Mere that had been, I think they call it pollarding, where they chop down the branches to stop it from splitting. I've just made a note here. The eider ducks kept me company with their awoo, awoo. They make the campest sound ever, and I absolutely love them. And it was just so joyful sitting there on my little camping stool, painting this tree, listening to the ducks beside me cheeping away. Just an example of how you can find beauty almost anywhere. This is a weed that was growing just underneath the back door when you come out of our kitchen, and I was really taken with the beautiful mix of purple and green in its leafage. So I captured it here in gouache. This was a new bird I'd seen in our garden. So we have a green finch that was taking up residence in our fir tree and singing to us really loudly. This is a watercolour of my plant Aggie, the silver sword philodendron. I have a plant journal and I'm keeping that as a record of all the houseplants I have and now the vegetables I'm growing in the garden. But for the sake of plain April, I used her one day when I just couldn't get outside to paint and I needed something to paint from life. So I chose her instead. More painting plein air. Admittedly, this little guy I painted sat in a coffee shop. So again, I was painting from life, but he wasn't an outside observation, whereas the garden bench, a path in the local park, and some cherry blossoms growing in our garden were all painted with me stood up holding my sketchbook and palette in one hand and painting as quickly as I possibly could so that I didn't drop everything. It seems really surreal to say, but one of my friends is Omar Wynne. We've gotten to know each other through Instagram. She has her own Patreon and YouTube and is a hugely successful artist. So when she asked me if I could provide some photographs from my trips to Martin Mears to share with her patrons and have a live drawing session from them, my answer was instantaneously, yes, of course. So this is a lovely hour of painting from my own reference photographs. We have a swan and their goslings, the view through some overhanging trees, the stepping stones as they were. They've now been increased, so there's a lot more meterage. I don't remember exactly how much, but this is just a small section of. So this is what I did with Omar, and I was left with this awkward space. So afterwards, we had a nesting box on our summer house that was home to mum and dad Blue Tits, and they had a baby. So I had the pleasure of watching them fledge for the very first time from the nesting box. My studio is only perhaps 10 or 15 metres away from this, so I could sit at my window and watch the baby rocking on the edge of the nest box, and I got a really good look at him, and this is the little guy that I saw. Weeks later, after there was no sign of the baby or parents coming back, we did have a little look in the nest and it was empty with just one egg in it. But I've painted the egg whole here rather than all cracked up like it was after this baby had fledged. Here's a illustrative bit. I had a moment where I just didn't know what to draw, and I have some strawberry shortcake figures on my desk here in the studio. I've got strawberry shortcake and blueberry muffin. It took some doing to try and find those images, but it was worth it. I'm really happy with how this watercolour and coloured pencil piece came out. There is some tooth to this paper, but it's hardly rough or particularly cold pressed, to be honest. It's more on the hot press end of the scale, but it can be a little bit tricky, especially if your coloured pencils aren't sharpened, to get a crisp line. So what I tend to do when I'm writing is write it out lightly once, sharpen my pencil, and then come back and go over the letters to get a cleaner, crisper finish. And I do a similar thing with the outlines. I tend to paint first and then add my line work afterwards, whether that's with ink or coloured pencil, as we have here. I recently downloaded an app called Merlin that lets you listen to birds and tells you who they might be and gives you some information about them. And we couldn't see them, but we got a recording of these guys. So I looked them up and added a little watercolour painting, and then came in with coloured pencil and near colour, as I tend to do with my animal illustrations, and did this Mr. and Mrs. Black Cat on an abstract watercolour background. We're entering the start of the heatwave weeks now. Obviously, the whole world is basically on fire at the moment, and here in England, we didn't escape. We've had a summer of 1 week of crazy intense heat and then a week of rain pretty much throughout the whole of June, July, and into August. And this was the first week when the temperatures really started to soar. I've captured little tiny bits, lots of illustrations that I built over a week rather than sitting down to do it all at once, because it was just too hot to exist. It is awful in England when it gets over 30 degrees because there's no shelter, there's no air conditioning, you just can't get cool. And the thought of being sat down to paint for hours and was just as unbearable as anything else. However, we did somehow manage to dig up our garden, lay a new border, and put down some shale. We then went on to use the palette to make some raised beds to grow vegetables in. We happened to get a new toy, which is the Ninja Creamy Swirly, a soft serve ice cream maker that we've had endless joy with since then. And there's just little motifs that remind me of that week and what it was like when it was so hot and we were working so flipping hard in the garden. This was something that I painted from life. My old boots had been pretty worn out by the time we finished the garden, with holes appearing in the soles, so it was time to replace them. And I tend to always paint my boots when I get a new pair, and then right before I either recycle or donate them if there's any life left in them. But these guys I did in gouache with a little pencil detail to finish, and I just plonked them on my desk next to me here and painted from life. More memories from the garden. This is the thing that I love most about this sketchbook. So much of it is inspired directly from real life happenings. It's not just working from reference photographs. These are things that I could actually sit and look at while I was drawing. Or I could use photographs that I'd taken in my own home or locality and use them as reference. And for me, that connection is just so important with my artwork. I really want my art to be about the world as I experience it in my tiny little corner of it, and not just be pretty pictures copied from reference images we've taken from places like Pexels and Unsplash. So I can hand on heart say the majority of the sketchbook is from real life things that I have experienced. Got a hawfinch with a gouache, watery gouache background, pencils and Neocolor to finish. This paper takes anything wet really well. It's not 300 GSM, I think it's only 220, but I'll check that for you. So it will accept washes really well. You can put multiple layers of water down and drop in pigment, and once it's dry, it's good to go and you can carry on layering it. So if that's how you like to work, I can highly recommend this paper. Once we had a visit from this hawfinch, which was a super rare sighting in our garden, I went down a rabbit hole, as I often do, and was investigating and researching different types of finch that you might see in the UK. So I've painted 5 different species next to our real life hawfinch. This is the tree that I can see from my studio window. It's actually my neighbour's tree and it overhangs our garden. He's just cut it back, so it's looking quite baldy at the moment. But back then, when I painted this a few weeks ago, it was really full and the greens were just glorious and glowing in the sunshine. And I really enjoyed capturing what I could see in the way of shape and colour rather than fixating on painting every single leaf and twig that I could observe. Now, I do have a history of being a sketch journaler, and I've filled numerous sketchbooks with my daily drawings from things that I have observed in my day to day life. But I moved away from it because I wanted to expand the reach of subjects I was capturing in my sketchbooks. But this is an example of a page that I might have drawn 5 or 6 years ago when I was doing it every day. I just slapped down some watercolour in the background, not completely knowing how the page was going to turn out. And I just started painting until the page was full. I've used watercolour predominantly for this, but I've come back in with a dip pen and waterproof ink and added in some line work and some text as well, just describing the things that I'd seen, so that we had a bit of definition, particularly because the background is a little dark in places and the images would somewhat disappear if it wasn't for that line work. But again, it took the dip pen beautifully well. I didn't have any problem with it catching or being scratchy. Can recommend this book for dip pen usage. You may have seen this recent video of mine where I swatched 60 of my watercolours. So we won't talk about that because there's a whole video for you to watch if you want to see that in detail. In this current worldwide economic climate where everyone is fighting just to pay for the bare essentials, we've had to learn how to live a very simple life, strip it back to the basics of things that we need, and to learn how to do things for ourselves. So here I have another painting of Thomas Hippo, and he is holding very proudly our new circular saw that we bought so that we could make some raised beds to grow our own vegetables. And this is my husband doing some weeding behind the box. So these I was able to do from life. I sat Thomas with the drill on the floor and painted him. And then I sat in the studio and watched my husband doing some weeding around the garden beds. And I firstly laid down a wash of warm yellow so that you really get that summer heat feeling from this painting. This was a session that Omar did. I think this one was for the Summer Retreat Club that Peggy Dean hosts every year. And we started off painting some apples in just one colour and then adding in some more colours and painting them again. And it was just another beautiful, typical Omar session. Fruit and veg is a big part of her work, and she does these loose watercolours beautifully. So that was fun. Here's me doing something that all of us should probably do more of but neglect to do, and that's thumbnails. Every month, Katie Moody gives her patrons a bunch of reference photographs, and this month it's all about France, where she'd done a recent workshop. What I did on this first page was take a simple dark indigo coloured pencil and map out some paintings that I might like to do, just to get an idea of firstly composition and then secondly value, so that I would know where I want to put my darkest darks. And then I took some of these thumbnails and developed them further in the next few pages. Even though some of these are still quite small and not a lot bigger than the thumbnails, it was really useful for me to have that plan to start with. And I worked from these rather than following the photographs slavishly so that I could loosen up my work. I always find that my landscapes get quite tight. So this was an attempt for me to use my memory and the thumbnail sketches and notes I'd made before and just see what happens. And I was very happy with this spread at the end of it. These are some slightly larger paintings from those thumbnails. I really enjoyed these, and in particular this one with the bridge that had the beautiful reflections in the water. I think reflections can be a bit intimidating, but I find them really quite simple to do once you stop overthinking it. So maybe if you're interested, I could do some videos on how to paint reflections and show you how I might compose a scene like this and make it a little bit more simple for you. I really liked this image that had the view of the water and bridge through some silhouetted trees and an overhanging canopy. So I really enjoyed that composition and wanted to try and represent it myself. And then this sunset drew me in. So I used near colour twos that I then activated with water for the sunset and then the basic washes of the fields below. And once that was completely dry, to paint the leaves of these trees that are kind of framing the scene. This is a page of scribbles of tattoo designs a friend of mine has asked me to work on. It's developed quite a bit from here, but I've done the rest of that on loose sheets of paper rather than using up a sketchbook, just doing tattoo designs. We've recently noticed a big uptick in the number of bats that we have come dusk here where we live in Birkdale. So after a fair few days of spending a good hour or so with my husband in the garden, just sat still in the quiet, waiting for the bats to come. I did a little bit of research, Kelsey's, and found out about some of the different types of bat we have in the UK. And then I had a really great time looking up reference photographs and painting these little characters in gouache, near colour, and pencil. I don't have the camera kit to allow me to take photographs in the dark, nor the skill, I should say. So these I have worked from reference images, but what I tried to do was just pull up Google searches of the different types of bat and have plenty of them on the screen at any one time. So I didn't end up copying them like for like and just use them as inspiration to get an idea of, for example, the ratio of the body to the wings and how the wings were split up, the different types of ears. And then just for funsies, I've added in quite big fangs on all of these fuzzy little potatoes. This was another Katie Moody live. We were drawing more from her adventures in France. So these are the pictures that I did. We always work with timers in Katie sessions, so a lot of these are only a few minutes at a time. But overall, I was really pleased with how this came out. Now, I haven't ever been to this area of France, but what I like is these little panels with some artwork, just free form, as a vignette, and then others that are bordered with these little panels. It looks like a travel journal, and I can almost imagine painting something like this on my next holiday for myself. Last week, me and my husband celebrated our 26th anniversary, and we took ourselves to Tatton Park, which is this wonderful stately home that has beautiful gardens, plenty of lakes. They have a park with wild deer roaming freely. There's a farm with lots of animals that you can see up close. And also, they had a Winnie the Pooh exhibition. So you could go through the woods and find these beautiful painted signs with illustrations in the old style of Winnie the Pooh. But also, they actually had an Eeyore's house and the bridge where you could play poo sticks and giant rhubarb. And it was just magic. Me and my hubby absolutely adore Winnie the Pooh. Eeyore is my soulmate. So I had the most wonderful time after we came home doing these line and wash watercolour sketches. And I've used this really like old fashioned vintage kind of style to depict the things that we saw, as well as some of the artwork we found in the forest. It was just a wonderful day, and I'm so glad that I've captured that in my sketchbook. Now, this spread is some of the botany that I'd seen in Tatton Park. They do have greenhouses with exotic plants. And I know you can't tell the scale, but this bird of paradise was absolutely enormous. I had no idea they could grow so tall. My husband is 6'3" and he would have barely come up to the stalk here. So this must be 20, 25 feet tall. It was vast, and I really wanted to capture him in my sketch. This was an attempt at capturing a plant I couldn't name. It had this really beautiful hot pink and lime green colour to its leaves. I'm not really happy with how it ended up, but overall I'm happy with the spread, so we'll let it lie. This, however, I'm really happy with. It's just gouache with no other media, and I was painting some of the conkers that I could see growing on the trees in the gardens at Tatton Park, and I had a great time painting out these leaves and trying to capture the movement and sort of the flex that you get in a leaf in the real world. And the thing that I'm most proud of is I think I've managed to get that kind of fuzzy outline of the conkers really well. And I've done that by wetting a circle of the page before starting and then dropping in paint colour by colour until I'd built up this sort of fuzzy greeny yellow sphere. And then once it was fully dry, I came back in with thicker gouache and added in these spiky bits to represent the sharp bits on a conker. This was the tree that I saw these conkers on. And again, it was absolutely enormous. It must be really ancient because that tree trunk was, I don't know, maybe 4 feet wide. And I loved how it was framed by these thinner, darker trees in the background. So I had a great time capturing that in gouache. This is a view over one of the lakes. And this is just as we were entering the forest to go on the Winnie the Pooh trail. And this one was a tree that I was really captivated with because it genuinely looked like that. I know it kind of looks pixelated and that it's a really strange silhouette for a tree, but I'll see if I can get a photograph for you to show you what I mean. I felt like I captured it really well, and I wanted to focus purely on the tree and ignore everything else around it. So in real life, this is surrounded by a forest of your typical firs and evergreens. But in this painting, because it was this subject that was my main focus, I've blurred out the background and I've kept the values really quite low so that very much centre stage. And then finally, we have one more gouache landscape that looks less bad on my camera screen than it does me looking at this up close. This is another fast and frantic one that I did with Katie, and this was from her summer retreat workshop she did with Peggy Dean. And that completes my sketchbook. The thing that I am most happy with is that I've managed to paint the majority of these pages from my real life, whether it's been sat next to an image and painting it in front of me, or I've collected the references myself. And this is a representation of my day-to-day life. And yes, of course, we've seen the pages that I've done with my artist friends on their live Zooms, where we've taken a subject they've chose and painted it in their way. But what I would say is, yes, it isn't my work, and I could never and would never claim it for my own. I remember that time that I spent on Zoom with Katie and Omar, painting away, chattering about art and geeking out about art supplies, and talking about the references that they'd chosen and how we might approach it, the challenges and the successes that we have, and sharing our work with the whole group afterwards. So, whilst that is very much based on someone else's work, it's still very much my experience, and I'm very happy to have that in this sketchbook. Until next time, thanks for watching. See you soon.